I was halfway through slicing the pie when Monica said it, loud enough that everyone at the table could hear. "I don't let my kids near hers. Bad blood runs strong." I froze. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. But then my mother, without even looking up from her plate, nodded and added, "Father, like child." I didn't say a word. I looked over at my son, Caleb. He was 8, sitting at the corner of the table with his fork still in the air, his little legs swinging under the chair. He had been quiet all evening, like always, coloring in the corner, being polite, asking to be excused before leaving the table. He looked at me. I could see it in his eyes. He'd heard everything. And then, before I could say anything, he stood up. His chair scraped the floor with a sound that made everyone turn. He looked around the table. First at Monica, then at my mother, then at me. Then he said calmly, clearly, "If I'm the problem, then why did Daddy leave me a letter and not her?" That was it. No yelling, no crying, just those words. The entire table went silent. Even Monica didn't know what to say, and I stood there holding a half-sliced pie, feeling like my 8-year-old son had just done something I hadn't been brave enough to do in years. He made them see him, and me, and everything they had refused to admit. And in that moment, I realized something. The blood running through my son wasn't bad, it was strong, and it was nothing like theirs. We were halfway through March when the invitation came, a text from my brother Lance that said, "Mom's birthday dinner next Sunday. She wants everyone there, just a small family thing." No emojis, no warmth, just an obligation sent through a screen. I stared at the message for a while before responding. I even asked Caleb if he wanted to go, hoping he'd say no, but he looked up from his book and said, "Is Grandma going to have that chocolate cake again?" I nodded. He smiled. "Then yeah, I like the cake." He had no idea what that house held. Or maybe he did, but being 8, he still believed that kindness could fix cold hearts. I used to believe that too. 3 years earlier, my husband Jason had died from a heart attack. It happened in our driveway on a Tuesday afternoon while he was helping Caleb ride his bike without training wheels. One second he was laughing, the next he was on the ground, and everything we knew changed forever. Jason wasn't perfect. He had a complicated past, especially in the eyes of my family. He'd made mistakes when he was younger, fights, some jail time, things he owned and outgrew. But to me, he was loyal, loving, and gentle in all the ways that mattered. To Caleb, he was everything. After the funeral, my family pulled away. They said all the right things in public, but in private, I could feel the shift. Phone calls became less frequent. Invitations stopped. When I did bring Caleb around, there was always this subtle distance. The cousins wouldn't play with him. Monica would gather her kids the second he walked into the room. My mother avoided conversations about Jason entirely, as if refusing to speak his name could erase the fact that he was once part of our lives. Still, I kept trying. I told myself family was complicated, that they were grieving in their own way. I excused the silences, the stares, the way Monica always referred to my marriage as that chapter. This time, for the birthday dinner, I dressed Caleb in the shirt my mother had given him last Christmas. He had never worn it before, not because he didn't like it, but because it still had the price tag on it, a forgotten gift in a bag of half-effort and obligation. He looked good, though, bright blue with little airplanes across the chest. I even got him to comb his hair. The drive took nearly 4 hours. The whole way, Caleb talked about the cake. He asked if Grandma would let him blow out the candles, too. I didn't have the heart to say she might not even let him help cut it. We pulled into the driveway of my childhood home just before sunset. It looked exactly the same. White siding, cracked front steps, the smell of overwatered grass hanging in the air. Familiar and strange all at once. Lance greeted us at the door. A half smile, a quick side hug, no real eye contact. Monica stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes scanning Caleb like she was checking for signs of something broken. Her twin daughters clung to her legs, whispering about what rooms they'd go play in. "Hey, Caleb," Monica said in that too sweet tone she used when talking to animals or people she didn't respect. "You've gotten so big." Caleb smiled and said thank you. Then he whispered to me, "Can I go draw?" I nodded, and he made his way to the little kid's table near the window, pulled out his notepad and crayons, and got to work. Dinner was roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and quiet tension, the kind that hums underneath polite conversation. Lance talked about his new car. Monica went on about the girls' ballet class. Evelyn, my mother, commented on the weather and how it was better than last year. No one asked how I was. No one asked how Caleb was adjusting to third grade or if he still missed his dad. I watched him out of the corner of my eye the entire time. He was drawing something with careful detail. When I walked past, I saw it was a picture of a man and a boy flying kites in a park. Jason used to do that with him. Even now, he remembered the colors of the kites, one red, one yellow. The birthday candles came out after dinner. My mother didn't invite Caleb to help blow them out. Clapped politely anyway. And I kept thinking, maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they just didn't know how to handle grief. Maybe this was the best they could give. Then Monica turned to Evelyn and said the words that shattered every excuse I had ever made for them. I don't let my kids near hers. Bad blood runs strong. That's when I knew. They weren't confused. They weren't distant because they didn't know how to help. They had made a decision. They had decided that because of who Jason was, because of what they believed about him, Caleb didn't deserve their love. And what made it worse, what made it feel like a punch to the chest, was that my mother agreed. That was the moment everything shifted. All the silent treatments, all the awkward visits, all the passive judgment suddenly had a voice. Clear, cruel, unapologetic. I looked at Caleb. His crayon had stopped moving. His hand rested on the table, and even though his back was to us, I knew he had heard every word. That dinner was the last time I walked into my mother's house without a boundary, because Caleb didn't deserve their shame, and I had spent too long trying to earn love from people who only knew how to judge. I wanted to believe Caleb hadn't fully understood what Monica said. I hoped the words hadn't settled into him the way they were settling into me, cold and sharp and cutting right through my chest. But when I looked at him again, I knew. He was quiet still, staring down at his paper. The crayon in his hand was no longer moving. The lines he had been drawing stopped halfway through a tree. The table was silent for a few seconds after Monica's words. Lance didn't look up. My mother calmly cut into her chicken, like nothing had been said. The air in the room was thick with something unspoken, but not unintentional. This wasn't a slip. It was a verdict, one that had probably been talked about behind my back for years. Only now they finally said it out loud like they were daring me to react. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat felt tight. My hands trembled under the table. I wanted to defend him. I wanted to say, he is not his father, or how dare you judge an 8-year-old? But something inside me cracked instead. The betrayal wasn't just Monica's, it was my mother's silence. Her quiet nod was louder than anything Monica said. I looked at her. She didn't even glance in my direction, just reached for the salt. There was a story my mother used to tell when I was young, about how, when I was born, I didn't cry right away. The doctor had to tap my feet and rub my back. She'd say, "You came into this world stubborn, holding your breath until you were ready." She used to say it with a smile. I hadn't thought about that story in years, but it came to mind now, and I wondered if she still believed I was the same girl, someone who could be shaken into breathing, someone who'd fall in line if pressed hard enough. I wasn't that girl anymore, but I wasn't ready to speak yet either. I looked at Caleb again. He was watching them now. Not crying, not fidgeting, just watching. Like he was trying to understand who they really were. Monica took another sip of wine and leaned back in her chair, her voice casual, as if she were explaining something perfectly reasonable. "I just think it's smart to be careful. Kids absorb everything. And with Jason's history, well, you never know what traits pass on. Temperament, impulse. My girls are sensitive." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how calmly she wrapped cruelty in fake concern. Like she was the only one thinking ahead. Like she was the reasonable one in a room full of people too polite to admit what they believed. My mother still hadn't said a word to me, but then she added softly, almost like it was an afterthought, "He's very quiet, just like Jason, always watching, always in his head." It was then I realized something that shook me. They weren't just judging Caleb. They were afraid of him. not because of anything he had done, but because of who his father had been. They had rewritten Jason into a cautionary tale, and now they were casting my son as the sequel. Caleb stood up. He didn't stomp or shout. He didn't cry or run to me. He simply pushed back his chair, walked around the table, and stood between me and Monica. He was 8 years old, barely taller than the table, wearing a 2-starch shirt with airplanes and a crown of soft brown curls that Jason used to brush back gently every night before bed. He looked up at Monica, then at my mother, then back to me. Then he said, "If I'm the problem, then why did Daddy leave me a letter and not her?" The silence that followed was complete. No one moved, no one spoke. Caleb turned to me and asked, "Can I show it to them?" I hesitated. The letter was sacred. Jason had written it the night before his heart stopped. I found it in the drawer of his nightstand with my name on the outside, but a note on the first page that read, "For Caleb when the time is right." I had never shown it to anyone else. Not my mother, not Lance, definitely not Monica, but Caleb had read it, not just once. He had memorized every word. I gave a small nod. He reached into the little side pocket of his jeans and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the corners, a little crinkled from being opened and closed too many times. He didn't hand it to anyone. He didn't read it out loud. He just held it up. "This is mine. Daddy left it for me because he knew people might say stuff. He told me not to listen. He told me to be better than what they say." Monica blinked fast. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. My mother stared at the paper like it was a ghost. Lance cleared his throat and finally looked at Caleb, really looked at him, for the first time that night. Then Caleb turned to me and asked quietly, "Can we go home now?" And in that moment, I knew the real answer to Monica's question. The bad blood wasn't running through Caleb. It was sitting at that table, hiding behind wine glasses and birthday candles, cloaked in silence and control. I didn't answer Caleb right away. He had just asked if we could go home, standing there in front of the people who were supposed to love him, holding that folded letter like it was armor. My hands were still in my lap. My mouth was still closed. But something inside me was finally moving. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the paper in Caleb's hand like it had said something out loud. She didn't blink. Monica shifted in her seat, adjusting her cardigan like the silence made her uncomfortable. Lance looked from one face to another, like he was waiting for someone else to speak first. No one did, so I stood up. I pushed my chair back gently and walked over to Caleb. I didn't say anything at first. I just crouched beside him, met his eyes, and nodded. That was all he needed. He slipped the letter back into his pocket, took my hand, and looked back at the table one last time. And then he said, "He wrote that letter to me because he knew who I was. You don't." We turned to walk away, but my mother's voice cut into the silence. "Amara, wait." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "You're misunderstanding us," she said. "Monica wasn't trying to be hurtful. She's just concerned for her kids." I turned then. Not because I expected her to say something honest, but because I needed to look her in the eyes when I finally said what I had held back for too long. Concern doesn't sound like what I heard. Concern sounds like love. What I heard was judgment. What I saw was you nodding when someone called your grandson a danger. Monica leaned forward. "No one said danger." "Bad blood," I said. "You said bad blood. You sat there and labeled an 8-year-old boy based on nothing but your opinion of his father. And you, Mom, you agreed. You didn't blink." "He has his father's temper," she said, quieter now, as if whispering made it more reasonable. "He watches too closely. He holds things in. That can be dangerous." My voice rose before I could stop it. "You want to talk about dangerous? You raised a son who won't speak up when his wife insults his sister's child at the dinner table. You raised a daughter who's been afraid to tell you the truth for 3 years. Jason had flaws. He owned them. He grew. He died trying to be a good man, a good father. He left a letter for Caleb because he knew one day you might try to make him feel like he was less." My hands were shaking. I could feel Caleb's grip tighten around mine, not out of fear, but like he was giving me permission to finish what he started. "I came here thinking I still owed you something. I continued. Some part of me still wanted your approval, still thought maybe if I stayed quiet, if I kept showing up, you'd remember that I'm your daughter, that Caleb is your grandson, that love is supposed to come first. Monica stood up now, her voice tight. Don't turn this into a scene. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of what she thought of me. You made the scene the moment you decided my son wasn't good enough for yours. Lance opened his mouth but stayed quiet. His silence used to hurt. Tonight, it just confirmed everything I needed to know. I looked back at my mother one last time. You were wrong about Jason, and you're wrong about Caleb. I won't let your fears shape the way my son sees himself. Not anymore. She didn't answer. She looked down at her plate, then over at the birthday candles still burning quietly beside the cake. Caleb tugged my hand again, this time gently. We turned toward the door. We walked to the car without saying goodbye. As I buckled him into his seat, he looked up at me and said, Did I do something wrong? No, I told him. You did something brave. He looked out the window for a moment, then back at me. Daddy would be proud? I nodded. He already is. I started the engine, but I didn't drive right away. I just sat there for a minute, looking at the house I grew up in, the people I had spent a lifetime trying to please. I realized I didn't feel guilt for walking away. I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. That night, I made a decision I should have made long ago. I chose my son over their comfort. I chose honesty over tradition. I chose to stop begging for a love that came with terms and silence and side glances. Caleb didn't need to change who he was. He needed to know he was enough, and it was my job to protect that truth, even if it meant burning bridges I once thought were sacred. So we drove away from the house, where blood was thicker than love, and I didn't look back. It wasn't until we were halfway down the highway that Caleb reached into his pocket and took out the letter again. He unfolded it slowly, smoothing it across his lap with both hands like it was a treasure map. I kept one eye on the road, but glanced at him through the rearview mirror. You want me to read it again? He asked. I'd love that, I said. He cleared his throat and began reading the words he knew by heart. His voice was steady, soft but clear, and I could hear every word as if Jason were in the car with us. Dear Caleb, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to say it out loud, and I hate that. But I want you to remember something. You are not what people call you. You are not their fears or their assumptions. You are kind, you are good, and you are mine. He paused and looked up. This part is my favorite. He looked back down and continued, You will be like me in some ways. That's okay. You'll also be your own person. You'll be better than I was. That's what I wanted most. You are my reason to try, my reason to stay calm, my reason to change. Caleb folded the letter again and held it to his chest. I reached for his hand across the seat. He held on tight. That letter had saved me more than once. On nights when I felt buried by grief, on mornings when I woke up panicked, unsure of how to do it all alone. It reminded me that Jason had left more than pain behind. He had left purpose. He had left Caleb. And somehow, in the middle of all the noise and judgment and silence, our son had held on to the truth of who his father really was. The next morning, I got a message from Lance. He wrote, I'm sorry for not speaking up last night. I should have said something. You're right about everything. I stared at it for a while. I believed he meant it, but I also knew that saying something privately, after the fact, wasn't the same as standing up in the moment. And I couldn't make room for that kind of quiet anymore. Not for Caleb, not for me. 2 days later, a small envelope arrived in the mail with no return address. It was postmarked from my mother's town. Inside was a short note, written in her familiar, neat handwriting. I don't know how to be what you need. I never learned how to grieve in front of people. I judged Jason because I was afraid he would hurt you. I didn't know how to accept that he made you happy. And I never got to tell him that I saw how much he loved that boy. I saw it. Even if I didn't say it. Maybe one day Caleb will forgive me for not being the grandmother he deserved. Maybe one day you'll forgive me too. There was no signature. I held the letter for a long time before placing it in the back of the same drawer where I had once found Jason's. I didn't feel angry reading it, just tired. tired of silence, tired of people apologizing in whispers when the damage had been done in front of an audience. That weekend, Caleb and I went to the park. The weather was warm, a soft breeze brushing against our faces. He brought his kite, the yellow one Jason had helped him pick out for his 5th birthday. It had sat in the closet for almost a year. When we got it into the air, Caleb ran across the grass, shouting, laughing, beaming. I watched him from the hill, sunlight in his hair, joy in every step. An older woman near me turned and smiled. "He's got a lot of energy." I smiled back. "He's got a lot of heart." And he did, despite everything that had been said, despite the people who looked at him and saw his father's shadow. Caleb carried light. He carried grace. He carried truth. I thought about how that dinner had changed everything. It had stripped away the illusion I'd been holding onto for years, that if I kept showing up, if I kept trying, things would get better. It had taken my son's voice to finally open my eyes, not to who my family was. I had always known that, somewhere deep down, but to who my son was becoming. He had stood up in a room full of adults and defended himself without anger, without bitterness, just truth. And that kind of courage doesn't come from blood, it comes from love. I sat on that hill and watched the kite dance above the trees. The string tugged gently in Caleb's hand as he ran, holding steady, refusing to let go. Jason would have been proud, not just of the boy, but of the mother standing behind him now, finally willing to let go of everything that had tried to keep them small. That night after the park, after the kite and the laughter and the wind in Caleb's hair, I tucked him into bed and sat beside him until his eyes began to close. He didn't say much, just held the edge of his pillow and whispered, "I'm glad we didn't stay at Grandma's." I asked him why. He blinked slowly and said, "Because home is where people like who you really are." That stayed with me. All my life, I had tried to shape myself into who I thought my family needed me to be. The quiet daughter, the one who didn't ask for too much, the one who could sit through uncomfortable dinners and force smiles, believing that showing up was the same as being accepted. I did it for years. I did it because I thought that's what family meant, enduring, forgiving, trying again, even when it hurt. But Caleb, at only 8 years old, saw the truth more clearly than I ever had. He understood that love doesn't have to be begged for, that respect shouldn't come with conditions, that who he is, who he's growing into, doesn't need to be defended to anyone who refuses to see him. I didn't call my mother again after that dinner. I didn't block her. I didn't send a dramatic message. I just stopped showing up to places that didn't make room for my son. I stopped explaining my decisions. I stopped chasing a version of family that only existed in photographs. For the first few weeks, it was quiet. No texts, no phone calls, no unexpected visits. Then came holidays. A small envelope arrived on Thanksgiving with a card that said, "Thinking of you both." It was unsigned, but I knew who it was from. I placed it in a drawer and didn't reply. I used to believe silence meant failure, that cutting ties was a kind of defeat. But it wasn't. It was a boundary, one I had needed for a long time, one I had never known I was allowed to set. The truth is, you can love people and still walk away from them. You can grieve what should have been and still protect what actually matters. Caleb asked about Grandma sometimes. He asked if she would ever come visit him again. I told him, gently and honestly, she might. But next time, she'll need to come as someone who respects you, not someone who judges you. He nodded like he understood. He asked me once why people thought his dad was bad. I told him the truth. Because your dad made mistakes when he was young. He didn't grow up in a family that helped him be better. But when he met you, he changed. He learned to be gentle. He learned to show up. You helped him become someone good. Caleb smiled. So I helped him grow up? Yes, I said. You did. Jason may have died when Caleb was 5, but what he gave him was still living. It lived in the way Caleb spoke with empathy. It lived in how he listened. It lived in that letter, worn from being read and carried, a father's final gift to his son, a reminder that he was seen, that he was worthy, that someone believed in his future, and now so did I, not in a hesitant, fearful way, not in a way that braced for judgment or hoped for outside approval, but in a steady, certain way. The way a mother believes in the one person she would fight the world to protect. The best part is, we didn't stay angry. We didn't build our lives around the rejection. We didn't need to. Instead, we built new traditions. We made our own birthday dinners with Caleb's favorite mac and cheese. We celebrated the small wins, spelling tests, losing a tooth, finishing a new book. We created a home where he never had to shrink himself to fit. And I grew too. I learned how to say no without guilt, how to say yes to peace, how to recognize when love turns into control, and how to walk away before it breaks you. I learned that the loudest moment in a mother's life isn't when she yells in defense. It's when she listens to her child and lets his truth lead the way. That dinner wasn't the end of our relationship with my family. It was the beginning of clarity, the beginning of choosing presence over tradition, truth over pretense, and most of all, it was the beginning of teaching my son every single day that his worth isn't determined by their fears or my silence. It's defined by how he treats others, how he carries himself, and how bravely he speaks when it matters most. And the night he stood up at that table and said, "Why did he leave me a letter and not her?" was the night I stopped being afraid of what they thought and started becoming the mother he needed me to be. Not a quiet one, not a polite one, but a brave one. For him. Always for him. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone you love, take a second to share it. Someone out there needs to hear they're not alone. Leave a comment below. Tell me your story, or just say hi. I read every single one. And if you believe in honest, real stories that don't sugarcoat life but still find the light in it, hit that like button. It helps more than you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that speak the truth about family, healing, and learning to choose yourself without apology. Thanks for being here. I'm glad you stayed.